Awesome. Jeff's cramming. Jeff's cramming on his notes right now.
Hey, Jeff's been on vacation. You stop. Give him a break.
I did. I was. I am. Was.
Okay, wait. Jeff's still on vacation. He just happens to be here.
And this is your first thing you've done.
This is literally the first thing I've done. I came in and printed my notes, and now I'm looking at my notes.
Hey guys, thanks for joining us around the Roundtable. Today we have a guest, Gary Runn, who has been a partner at our church for a long time on our elder board and also founder of Vocari Leadership. And we have a great conversation about his time with Cru and the data they found about what it looks like to engage people with the gospel. And so we hope you enjoy. So I think it's kind of funny, because I think I made this defiant statement either an episode or two ago about how we don't have guests. Right. And now this is the second episode in a row where we have a guest. Gary Runn is one of the elders on our elder board, been the leader at Austin Ridge for a long time, teaches with us with the equip ministry. And so Gary, thanks for being on today.
Yeah, great to be here.
And I'm going to let you kind of give a little bit more background to who you are and kind of what you bring literally to the table today. But we've been in this conversation and we've really been talking about culture, Christians' response to culture, and then kind of how we really should be responding. And we kind of want to take a little bit of a turn. The conversations has under that umbrella has been about deconstructing our faith or deconstructionism. And we've talked all about that. If you haven't listened to those episodes, we encourage you to go back. I think we started this kind of new season on episode 61 there in the catalog. But today we want to talk about we asked Gary to come on because we want to talk about the different types of people that we're engaging in our culture. It's 2022, and there's data, and this data might be a couple years old, but still, I think it's relevant for this. And I guess Gary, Cru did quite a bit of research, and so give your background with Cru first of all. People don't know what Cru is, and kind of your experience with Cru, and then kind of introduce the data that we're going to be discussing today in the episode.
Sure. So I did spend 41 years with Cru. So Cru, formerly known as Campus Crusade for Christ, probably best known for our collegiate ministry and where we got our start back in 1951. But since those early days, has expanded to many ministries, and we're in probably 190 countries around the world. So only recently, hasn't even been a year yet, that I left full-time staff with Cru to launch a business. But still affiliate staff with Cru, so still have a connection to Cru. And a few years ago, we did launch very robust research around this topic that you're bringing up. We actually hired an outside firm. We hired a social science researcher. We wanted to make sure that we were approaching our topic and the data with honesty and not as little bias as possible in the conversation. And actually, even though that research is a few years old now, about 3 years old, two other research projects have come out, one from the Billy Graham Association that simply validates everything that we saw. So I think this research is going to have a shelf life for a while. I think it is our culture at the moment. And so it was around what it became. It was actually started out to be around branding. We were trying to figure out a branding project, but it quickly became about really evangelism in the 21st century.
Okay.
And so that's what it became.
Wow.
So Research Reveal actually was part of the lead project on that. Myself and another coworker, we presented around the country probably about 25 to 30 times in various settings, not just for Cru staff, but for Christian professionals, largely those in the pastorate, those with other nonprofits, and Cru staff. And we presented all over the U.S. from coast to coast, everywhere in the middle, over the course of about 2 years.
Wow.
So have engaged with this research a lot in that time.
Yeah, and so literally, I mean, you guys would go around. What do those look like? And I mean, the range of people that you interacted with, you guys were able to...
For the research itself?
Yeah.
Yeah, the research was both qualitative and quantitative. Originally started off with, I thought, a fascinating study known as a qual board study, where we gathered 24 people, very much selected according to a variety of gender, well, not too much variety, but both gender makeup, ethnicity. Yeah.
This just became a whole different interview.
Yeah, it did.
Let's unpack with yours.
Both genders. Very diverse ethnically, very diverse on the realm of spiritual understanding. Yeah. So that was 3 days in a row of 8 hours a day. And we actually could, it was done over technology, so we could actually drop in and listen and watch. And it was fascinating to do that. So that was 24 hours of just qualitative research. We backed that up with over 400 to 500 surveys across the country. We mainly engaged in 6 cities, 2 in the East Coast, 2 in the West Coast, 2 in the middle of the country. So that added some quantitative research, and then we circled back around and did 20 to 30 focus groups across the country again to validate one more time. So pretty robust, good sample size that matched all the criteria for good research project. Made sure that, again, we were hands off as crew. But hired that out to make sure we got
that's really
unbiased.
good. And I think before we get into like the specific what findings and the data that appears, I think we should do some real quick brief work on you mentioned the word evangelism and the engagement of evangelism. And so how would we, at Austin Ridge define evangelism and the process of evangelism? Or I guess the better question is, let's start with crew.
How do we define it?
How do you guys define what the goal of the project would have been? And it was evangelism, but what is evangelism? Yeah,
so 2 questions there, right? There's what is evangelism, and then what was our overall goal with that? I think evangelism, as we think about it biblically, it literally means good news. It's the proclamation of good news.
Right.
And so ultimately, I think as we all understand it, it's the good news about what Jesus Christ came to do for us, his death, burial, and resurrection, and our faith in that, our trust in that for our own salvation. Although I think Scripture talks about it from a personal level and a corporate level, we probably in the United States tend to focus more personally. But then on the research side, we also wanted to go a little bit farther. What does engagement look like across a broad spectrum of people? We're in a different place, even for crew, in 2022 than we were in 1951 when the organization was founded. Our country's in a different place. Our culture's in a different place. Religion's in a different place. So we wanted to begin to understand, what does it look like to engage the broad spectrum of people as they exist today in our culture in this country?
Yeah, that's good.
I love the word engage that you keep bringing up in reference to evangelism, in reference to the gospel.
Yes.
Because I think we sometimes forget that the gospel is something we're supposed to engage with personally, that it fuels who we are and how we think and how we even approach people. But we also have to engage others with the gospel. So I love that word.
Well, I love that highlight because it really does start with within us, right? As we think about, pray about who the Lord's put in our lives to engage the gospel with. That it's a process. It isn't just, I like the word engage as opposed to just share. Sharing has this we're just going to start throwing things and, the engagement. I guess we all picked up on that word.
Yeah, as far as the engagement thing, excuse me, one thing that's interesting about you and crew is that you're not just a North American
entity.
So you've served around the world with crew. Crew has offices still around the world. Do y'all know if this data that we're going to talk about kind of extends beyond just our particular culture, or is it more?
No, great
North
question.
America?
The research was very much focused on the U.S.
Okay.
But I would say principally,
Right.
there's some takeaways that I think would aid any follower of Jesus that wanted to be able to engage others around the good news anywhere in the world. So principally, I think we landed on some things, but the research was very U.S. based.
Okay.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think we want to get under the hood here, and hopefully, as you're listening to this, we hope this encourages you, because you might see through the data, through the research of these 7 different kind of personas. Is that the right way to put it? 7 different personas.
That's the word, yes.
That these people are in your life, and you might be wondering how to engage and how to the best way, and so we're going to go through it, and we'll just see.
Yeah, Joey, and I'd literally say these 7 personas, this is your family.
Wow.
These are your friends. These are your neighbors. These are your coworkers. They're all around you, whether you're aware of it or not. And while they're broad forecasts of people, I think they do encompass pretty much everyone around you.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. All right, well, we got them in front of us as well, but you just want to go down and just start kind of talking about them a little bit?
We can.
Okay.
Yeah, so one part of the research, and we often talk about there were 5 primary learnings that we took away from the research, this being one of them, and possibly the most significant one, because it helps us to orient, as you mentioned earlier, who's around us and who are we trying to talk to?
This is kind of teasing it a little bit, but what were the total 5? I mean, we're going to talk about one of the 5, right? Is that my understanding?
That's right.
Learnings, but what are all 5?
Yeah, so all 5, these 7 personas were the starting point. Who are the people around us, and what's their orientation to faith.
Okay.
It's probably or spirituality.
Good.
Then also it produced a 6-point scale of belief. Where do these same people fall along a scale of belief? Again, mainly oriented around, in our case, Christianity.
Right.
It also highlighted, which we'll talk about this on the personas, I think a key finding that shocked me, and that is that 84% of all people are willing to talk with you about spiritual things if.
Oh, wow.
And there's a big if.
Yeah.
And that revolves around another one of the findings, which are 5 behaviors. 5 behaviors that the respondents told us really matter if you want to talk about spiritual things with them.
Are these behaviors that they have noticed in you beforehand?
They're largely behaviors that they're saying. Matter of fact, it was interesting, the research. These 5 behaviors matter if I'm going to have the spiritual conversation with you. And by the way, we don't believe you can do it.
Oh, wow.
So very strong. It was
Wow.
almost more, I've not experienced this from Christians or
That's
Christianity.
good. Wow.
But this would actually, if you could do this, if you could demonstrate this, I'll have that conversation with you, which I think is extremely encouraging.
Which goes back to the engagement pickup.
Right.
Yes.
We talk about engagement,
Yes.
and there's 5 behaviors. Maybe that's another episode. I don't know. Maybe we'll get into it later.
We'll
but
see.
there's 5 behaviors of engagement.
And then the last thing was
We don't get to know them? We don't get to know the 5 behaviors? Okay, later, Gary.
Yeah, be continued. That's right.
And the last learning, which is also important, is that there's 3 core longings. And back to Jeff's question, I think these are universal. So the 3 core longings were peace, prosperity, and purpose. That every person on the planet, I think, longs for peace. And this begins internally in their own life, not just in the world, but internal peace. Prosperity, which mainly means stability. I just want to be stable in every way. So it's not just financial. And then we're not surprised probably with purpose. Why do I exist? Why am I here? But these are core longings of every person.
Wow. I really do want to talk about the personas because that's what we set out to
I
do.
think
But
that's
those other
important.
ones are really, really important as well. No, it's really helpful. So let's get down. Let's get to it.
Or just real quick before you get in, is all this available on Crew's website or anything? Like, if somebody is engaging with this right now, and they wanted to read along?
So we're actually in the process of reshaping it in a more digestible way, if I can say it like that. Okay. But if you were to go to crew.org /city,
okay.
so crew.org /city, you'll see a number of things on there, but one of them is around this research, and there's actually 6 20 to 25 minute videos.
Oh, wow.
And literally, we filmed some of the presentations I was a part of. And so that's a way to hit all of these learnings.
Okay.
And right now, we're trying to redigitize them in a better way. But
Yeah, that's really good.
Yeah.
And this is a plug because somewhere, wherever you're listening to this, whether in 2022 or hopefully in 2024, I don't know, that sharing your faith is one of our classes. And a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today is going to show up in those classes.
And since it's now 2024, space is limited. So many people are coming to these classes. You need to sign up early.
Well done. Well done. But if you are listening to this in time, we actually have a class starting on Sunday, March 27th. So anyway, check that out. This is 2022. Anyway, all right, Gary.
We digress.
Here we go.
Yeah. So you want to talk about each of the personas briefly?
I think so. Yeah, and then let's engage and just see where it goes.
Yeah, we gave each of these personas a name and a face to try and help us both retain, but also engage. In other words, again, if these are real people, let's not just leave them as a construct, but let's give them a face and a name. So if you were to think of somebody maybe that's farthest away from Christianity, we'd begin with Jen.
Okay.
And Jen's somebody who's in her 40s. She's an Asian American woman in this case. And these labels are self-identified. So Jen would call herself an anti-dogmatic.
Okay.
And what that really means is, I know what you Christians stand for and your dogma, and I stand opposed. I stand against it. I'm anti whatever it is that you're claiming.
Right.
So Jen would be somebody that maybe has had experience with Christians or even the church at large, or at least her perception of that. And again, she's rejected it. What's fascinating with each of these, and you can see there's a quote that goes with each of them. We won't read the quotes, but I think more importantly, there's 3 metrics around every persona. 1, what's your understanding of Christian values, and what do you think of those Christian values? 2, what's your perception of Christianity and or the church at large? And then 3, how open are you to engagement? And so every one of these personas we're going to talk about has an orientation to that. Jen actually is open to Christian values. Best she understands it, and we're not saying that she fully understands, but whatever she understands of Christian values, she would say, yes, those are good values. But then she has two strongly opposed metrics. One is I reject what my understanding of Christianity in the church, and I'm not open to engagement.
Okay.
So that's Jen.
Yeah, that's good. I think I already have questions about, but I think let's go through them.
We'll hit them all pretty quick.
And then I think we'll come back.
Okay, and I'll just give these same
that's
reference
right.
points.
That's great.
So then you have Alan.
Okay.
Alan would label himself as comfortable. Alan's a 40-something Caucasian man who grew up maybe in a fairly affluent setting. And he would probably even say he lacks for very little, and that probably aids his sense of comfortability. But he's also comfortable in his agnosticism. Mm-hmm. He's comfortable not knowing about God or anything to do with the Bible or probably even church. Now, again, he's open to Christian values. You see that on his metric.
Right.
But he has probably a don't care attitude in his perception of Christianity and church. It's not that he's opposed or for, he just doesn't care. Mm-hmm. It's a non-entity to him. But he would have some openness to engagement around spiritual things. He would say, I'm always up for a good conversation around spirituality, so he's open to that.
Okay.
So he's comfortable. That's how he identifies.
Okay. Yep.
And there's Danielle. Danielle is a 20-something multi-ethnic woman, and she would label herself as anxious. And that has many layers to it. I think there's personal anxiety. There's probably anxiety at large of what she sees out in the culture. There's probably also anxiety around church and Christianity. Kind of the not knowing in the realm of spirituality. So again, she also has a positive view of Christian values. She would have maybe somewhat of a positive value towards the church. She has a yellow dot, which kind of is a caution. It's like, maybe. Best I understand, I'm not necessarily opposed or against, but I have questions. But then you see, again, she's open to be engaged. She's open for a good conversation around spirituality. But she would label herself, again, as anxious. And I think actually that's a growing part of our population that really is feeling and experiencing a lot of anxiety about the world at large, personally, but even maybe around faith.
Yeah. Yeah.
So sizable group.
Okay.
Then you have Erron, and I never say that quite right, and he is a 20-something Hispanic male. And he would label himself as an explorer. So he's actually actively exploring spirituality, not necessarily Christianity, but that might be one thing he's exploring. But he might be exploring a variety of religions or belief systems. Again, he has a positive view of Christian values. You're going to see this across all 7 personas, that they all have a positive view of what they think.
I'm interested in that.
Yeah, the Christian values. But notice that he has a negative perception of Christianity in the church.
Okay.
So whatever he understands of that, it's not that he's opposed, but he does have a negative perception of it. But once again, he's open to engagement.
Yeah.
Because he's actively exploring. That makes sense.
Sure.
I actually think this is a growing part of the population too.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's Erron. Then we have Crystal. And Crystal would label herself disillusioned. She's a 20 or 30-something African-American woman. And she would fit, probably from your previous podcasts, she is probably one that is deconstructing.
Okay. Yeah.
But in this case, she's deconstructing because of her either experience or her perception, and probably both, of the church. Meaning she was a part of it. She maybe grew up in it. But she's in a season of either rejecting or deconstructing her experience of the church and making that synonymous probably with her experience of Christianity.
Yeah.
Again, would be affirmative of Christian values. Right now has a negative perception of the church and Christianity.
Yeah.
But notice that she has a yellow dot, meaning maybe I'm open.
Okay.
So it's interesting. The only two of all 7 personas that we have to be careful in our engagement is Jen, who stands completely opposed, and Crystal, who has actually experienced the church maybe for a good portion of her life, but now has a lot of skepticism, a lot of concerns, and she's saying, maybe I'm up for engagement, maybe I'm not.
Yeah. Sounds like, to me, Crystal's a little bit hurt.
Probably been wounded through the church.
So there's fear.
Or she's watched the church wound others in her perception.
Right.
It's not going to happen to her. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, so there could be a defensive side to that, Jeff. Yeah, to your point. So we need to, probably more than anything, listen well to Crystal before we talk. Then you have Wes and Sean. Wes and Sean would both clearly be followers of Jesus. Crystal might be, could be for sure.
Yeah.
We're not certain. She might not be certain anymore.
Right.
Wes and Sean, we know, are. So Wes would label himself an inquisitive follower. And you notice he has 3 green dots, meaning that he sees Christian values as something very positive. He has a good perception of the church and Christianity at large, and he's always up for engagement. And he's a true follower of Jesus. He's one that would probably be considered in the discipleship pathway. He wants to grow. He wants to be equipped.
Right.
He's trying to figure out, better understand his faith and how to give it away.
Yeah.
And then Sean, who would label himself as a faithful follower of Jesus, he would be seen probably more as a Christian leader within his own church. Okay. Not a professional, not a pastor, but somebody who's a lay person, but has journeyed with Jesus for a while, and certainly with the church, feels equipped, feels ready. He's actively leading and would consider himself even an influencer. So again, he has 3 green dots. Very positive view of Christian values, obviously positive perception of Christianity in the church, and is engaging others. So he's always up for engagement, but he sees himself as, I need to move forward and engage with others.
Yeah.
So there's all 7.
That's really good. Yeah, just I guess real quick to as a review. So the anti-dogmatic, the comfortable, the anxious, the explorer, the disillusioned, the inquisitive follower, and the faithful.
Yes.
Are the 7 personas. I want everyone to engage in this. One of the first things that jumps off the page is that all 7 have positive views on Christian values.
Yes.
All 7.
Yes.
What is that? Like
What's that about?
Yeah, I mean, because the range and scale from these different personas, I mean, really do vary, but that is the consistent thing through it.
Yeah, it was actually fascinating, the research, and there's 2 parts to this I think are really helpful. One, it is their perception of Christian values.
Right.
So, where we understood from the research that was taken, a lot of people have some sense of the 10 Commandments in the Old Testament.
Sure.
So Exodus chapter 20 and the 10 Commandments.
Yeah.
Or it could be the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5, 6, and 7. So people have heard, they may not know where that's located in the Bible, but they've heard those things.
Yeah.
And so whatever they perceive to be, and they may not have it exactly right, but they do have this sense that Christian values are positive, largely beneficial for others, and should be lived out.
Yeah.
The other thing that's fascinating about this is, to a person, everybody had a positive perception of Jesus, but not the church.
Yeah.
The old Gandhi.
A little bit, and so they might not all
like
agree
Jesus,
that Jesus
but not his
was
follower.
God or that Jesus died and was buried and rose again.
Right.
But whoever he was as a historical figure, a very positive view of Jesus. And so I think even the apologetic questions have changed in our day, because it used to be, when I was growing up, did Jesus even exist? That was one of the main apologetic questions. That's not a question on the table anymore. It's, does he matter?
Wow. Wow.
He exists. I believe he existed. He was a historical figure.
Yeah.
Don't know if he was God, but he was a man that existed.
Right.
But does he really matter? Because as they look at the church and those who claim to follow Jesus, there seems to be a gap.
Go ahead.
Oh, well,
Yeah.
I was just thinking, we talked about this earlier in one of our podcasts about that. To me, I see that they all have green dots on Christian values as evidence that we're all made in the image of God. There is something imprinted in us that understands that, even if we can't articulate it, or even if we wouldn't admit it with our mouths.
Yeah,
We are made in the image of God. I think that's so important to remember as we're engaging.
Totally. And I think, like you just highlighted, the internal, something hardwired in us that God ordained, God designed. And then the external piece to me is that there is some that of God's truth. Like they identify with some semblance of God's truth.
Right.
On the outside. So whether it be the 10 Commandments or the Sermon on the
Oh,
Mount,
yeah,
or
that's
love
good.
God, love people, or, that these quote unquote values, I guess it's a combination of the internal desire, but also it matches with something they've heard from Christian truth. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Is that something just kind of in the water in North America, or is it something you feel like they're actually have heard and observed, and now they're seeing a gap between what they've heard and observed in a bygone era and people they knew that they respect? Does that make sense what I'm asking?
I think so. That's a great question. I think it's less in the water than it used to be.
Yeah.
Because, you probably saw maybe the Pew Foundation, they do yearly research on the state of the church in America. And I think it was last year, for the first time in their recorded history, they noted that now those who would say they attend church at all drop below 50%. So even would affiliate with the institution of the church in our country, whatever brand that is. So I think our culture is certainly less spiritual, less Christian oriented than it used to be. But I think back to Lori's point, I think this imprint of God, this imago Dei, sometimes we use that Latin phrase, the image of God. I think it's more that, Jeff, that there's this sense that do unto others, that kind of mentality, whether I've heard it or it's just like, yep, you should treat people with respect and treat them well versus poorly or some form of oppression. So I think it is more part of the image of God in us. I think we were all created to worship. We will worship something.
Yeah.
It may not be the God of the universe.
Yeah.
But I think that's part of it.
Yeah. Okay. And I think, one of the things that was really impressed upon me before, as I prepared for today, was that for all of us, we need to look at these 7, and particularly perhaps Jen as the one who might be, the anti-dogmatic, the one that's furthest, quote unquote, away and not wanting to engage, not as an enemy.
No.
Not as the adversary. Sometimes we Christians, because again, going back to kind of the framework, culture, Christian response to culture is that we view secularism as the enemy and a threat, but they're made in the image of God, who are where they are, with reason, and we get to pursue them, not as an enemy, but as a fellow image bearer of God,
And with inherent value.
with inherent value,
And dignity.
yeah, for sure. So I think one of the burning questions people are, as they're listening to this, is we probably can't go down each of all 7 and say, how do I engage them? How do I pursue them? But I guess this would naturally lend itself to go into the 5 behaviors, or the engagement aspect. So what would Jen say, for example? I don't think you can do it.
Right.
But how do we engage these 7, or I guess really the first 5 in particular?
Yeah, I think there's 2 ways to think of this. So I'll give you a broader scope first.
Yeah.
And it's a way to think about all 7. There's a certain way we have to approach both Jen and Alan, so the comfortable and the anti-dogmatic.
Right.
Then I think there's 3 in the middle, Danielle, Elron, and Crystal, and then there's Wes and Sean. And I do think this is a season where it is engagement. It is going to be probably more of a process and a journey than a moment in time and an event. And that's not to say events and moments in time don't matter. I think the gospel always deserves the right to be heard in its essence, but in our cultural moment. So I would say with Alan and Jen, those farthest away, it's primarily about showing them Jesus. So it's about incarnating the gospel. That means getting close and probably not proclaiming, simply demonstrating, validating those Christian values they already believe are good. Can we validate and close the gap?
And that's going to help them overcome the negative perception.
Yes, and it's going to, and it is a form of proclamation. We just tend to bifurcate in the Western world. We think, well, it's only words. No, I think it's speaking and doing. It is good news and good deeds. But with Alan and Jen in particular, we've got to get close and show them Jesus. How do we serve them? How do we care for them? How do we be concerned about the things that they're concerned about, whether it's personally or culturally?
Yeah. How do we lower ourselves?
Yes.
How do we serve with humility? It's kind of like you got to be like Jesus so that people will
here we
like
go.
Jesus.
Here we go. Now I know I'm back at work.
Well,
There you go.
We're back.
She says that.
I say that all the time. You got to be like Jesus so people will like Jesus.
But Gary, that's social gospel.
Oh,
There's somebody listening right now
Right.
that before I even said that was going, but what about?
yeah, and it's fascinating to me when I hear that. And I think I oriented that way too for a season. But if you read your whole Bible from cover to cover, you can't escape justice issues. You can't escape doing as well as communicating. You can't escape the ability to get close and care for others. It's more of a holistic approach to the gospel. We had the luxury, and I say that very cautiously because it's not true, but I think we thought we had the luxury for decades that all we need to do is proclaim.
Yeah.
And whether our lives matched the proclamation or not didn't matter so much. Part of that's because we had a culture that affirmed some of these things. That is not true anymore.
that's a good point.
So we've got to love well to proclaim well.
Yeah.
And so again, with Alan and Jen, we've got to get close. And it's not from superiority.
Yeah.
It's actually as a fellow sojourner.
Yeah.
They're not any different than us, right? In many ways, we still stumble. There's times I still am overly comfortable. There's still times I stand against certain belief systems, probably wrongly in my posture. How do we simply show them again what Jesus is like?
It's almost like the flip has been in previous era was it's kind of up to them to learn about us. It's like here's
Yeah.
your 4 spiritual laws, here's
Yeah.
your whatever, and learn it and go.
It's a crew tool.
As opposed to now,
Yeah.
it's us. It's our job to learn about them.
Yes. Can we be divinely curious all the time and move towards people?
It's really good.
I love that phrase,
Me too.
divinely curious. And that's one of the things that I forget what book it was from, and maybe it was from some of the research too, Gary, but just asking really good questions. Being curious with the
Yes.
one who's wondering.
Yes.
So I think one of the books calls them the wonder questions. I wonder, and instead of coming at them with answers and like the know-it-alls and what Jeff you're saying, like, well, here are the things you just need to know.
Right.
It's you walk along with them
Yes.
through their journey. Because you can't just pick them up on their path and just place them in the kingdom. It's a journey, it's a path. And so they're on it, and you get the privilege to be on it with them.
And to be fair, it's much more of what we see in Scripture. It's more of that journey. It's like, when did the disciples start really believing in Jesus? Well, maybe there. Oh, wait, here
Maybe
again.
there, yeah.
Maybe it was there. Well, maybe it wasn't until after he. You know what I mean? It's like,
by the way,
there's a continuum.
Us
Yeah.
too.
Us too, yeah.
Yeah,
we were
for
on a
sure.
journey. We are on a journey, but
Right.
particularly before Jesus, we're on the journey. And sometimes, and I think that's what the second kind of bullet point there is the negative perception. That was a lot of them, was the negative perception. And it is because what we talk about, orthodoxy and orthopraxy, they didn't match up, right? What we
Right.
say we believed versus how we were acting. And a lot of that is in the way in which we represent Jesus.
Well, by the way-
or not represent Jesus.
We ask these respondents, where do you largely get your knowledge of the church and Christianity? 2 sources.
Yeah.
Social media, Hollywood.
Yeah.
So we're
tough to
1,
combat that.
2,
Those are our
3.
best representations by far.
We're 10 steps down. Now, listen, when it comes to social media, sometimes we've created that gap.
Oh, sure.
How we engage.
Yes.
But in other cases, somebody else created the gap. So we have to fill the gap. The only way we can do that is through our own persona.
That's what I was just going to say. And then in real life, so you have social media and you have Hollywood, and then in real life, we've gotten real quiet. In a way,
We've gotten afraid.
or
Yeah.
afraid.
me.
That's good. Either afraid and quiet, and said no one wants to hear from me, even though 84%, the data shows 84% are willing to engage.
Yes. Yeah.
Or we've become loudmouths and
Yes.
and misrepresenting the ethic of Jesus and of the
We've
gospel.
entered the culture wars.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so I'm afraid too, Lori.
Sorry, I want to keep this positive, but you have to address it.
I'm just sitting
Yeah.
here like, this, Gary's so smart. That's actually what I was thinking. Like, I just need to sit
Just
and
giving
listen.
you the research. No, but to Lori's point, I'm afraid too. And the fear often is, and in the evangelism class, I hear this often, I don't know what to say. And B, I might mess it up. And I always say to them, and including, I have to say this to myself all the time, actually, if I move towards people, I can't mess it up. And it's okay, I don't know what to say.
Right.
Yeah.
If I listen, I don't need to say anything for probably a long period of time. So it's not so much about saying as hearing. So hearing over speaking. And if you just move towards people, I think that alone, it's an act of faith for sure, in light of fear. I just think God's bigger than us, and I don't think
Yeah.
we can mess this up.
So,
Yeah.
Gary, you mentioned the 3 core longings
Yeah.
earlier. So, for Alan and
I got to
Jen,
come back to the other
The 5
people.
behaviors.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We're
No,
going
well,
back
the
to-
other.
Oh, yeah.
Let me give you the other 3. I'll
Oh,
come back
yeah,
to that too.
Yeah.
So think about 3 people in the middle.
Yeah.
So if Alan and Jen, we mainly need to show them Jesus.
Yeah.
For Danielle, Aaron, and Crystal, we need to walk with them almost in a discipleship way, even if they don't know Jesus yet. So this is a little bit more give and take. This still leads with questions, but this is where we can begin to provide answers. But they need to be thoughtful. They need to be in dialogue. It's going to be over time too. If Danielle's anxious, how do we help her see that anxiety could be met through Jesus? If Aaron's exploring, how do we actually validate that exploration, not put down some other faith system, but maybe show them how Christianity stands tall, so to speak. Or with Crystal, she's now got an experience with the church. How do we listen really well and not invalidate her experience, but again, try and show her something different and walk through it. So this is if one's kind of an incarnation, make Jesus real to Jen and Alan. These other three, it's walking with and long dialogue. And then finally, Wes and Sean, they're true followers. They just want to grow. They're learning how to grow, seeking how to grow.
Yeah.
Those are mentoring moments. Those are pure discipleship moments. Those are exposing them to anything the church may have to offer so they can grow and turn around and give their faith away to others.
Yeah.
They're the easy ones.
Yeah.
Everybody else we've got to get close, walk with.
Yeah. That's good.
So now you 5 behaviors, 3 core longings. What were you?
Well, yeah. Where do we go from here?
I'm sorry.
Yeah. No, it's good.
Well, I was so focused on the Alan and Jen things, so they're furthest away.
Yeah.
You guys want to focus in on them more, or do you have a preference one way or the other?
I heard quote unquote fighting words from "we can't do something."
Yeah.
So I'm like,
That's how I look at you. I'm like,
yeah.
that was it coming down to right now. Yeah, no. What I was thinking about Alan and Jen, those 3 core longings. So how does show them relate to peace, prosperity, purpose?
Yeah, fascinating in the research. One of the things about the 3 core longings not only was an identification of I think, again, something universal in all of us, back to Lori's idea of the imprint of God upon us, but now in a broken setting. But the respondents also said, and if you want a pathway of conversation, here it is. So those 3 core longings are not just, they're actually concentric circles, if you can picture that. In other words, the easiest place to enter is around anxiety.
So the peace.
Yes. The second place, and it's a little more intimate, is around prosperity or stability. The most intimate thing, and don't fence jump, is purpose. Now, here's the challenge. Think of all of our tools that were developed in the last 50, 60, 75 years. They almost all go straight to purpose. And the culture's telling us that's 2 bridges too far. That's too intimate for you to start there. So this is a journey, and it's not super linear. You can't think of it as, okay, I did peace, now can I do prosperity? It's not that linear, but it tells you, and by the way, this is not only a path of conversation, this is also your point of authenticity and empathy. You know, Joey, were you anxious about something today already, even mildly?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, me too. Matter of fact, I can give you a big category that I'm daily anxious about. So this is where we're no different than anybody around us, and yet we know we found a Savior.
Man, if you're over the age of 40, there, everything you just said is disorienting for how we were trained to do evangelism and whatnot. It's like, start with, why are you here? Why did God put me here? That was what we were trained to do.
And if you were to die tonight.
Yes.
And if you were to die today, why would God? Yeah. Those are all great questions. It's just they're not the first questions, is what you're saying.
Right.
Versus, and I think, even this pandemic we've been walking through that's now endemic, but my wife and I both realized just even asking people like, hey, how's it going for you in this season?
Yeah.
Anxieties spill out.
Yeah.
And we get to reciprocate like us too.
Yeah.
And so it's common ground. So some of the 5 behaviors here, I can sum it up.
Yes, but the us too.
Yeah, the us too. Me
is
too.
Just sitting.
Me too.
And being able to just not say, yeah, but let me tell you.
Yes, not a yell, but it's me too.
Exactly. All the verses in the Bible on why you shouldn't be feeling the way you're feeling.
Yeah.
And there's, it's like,
have you read Philippians, for goodness sake?
You should know better.
But really and truly, like there's this, it is great to hope, but it's okay. It's okay to grieve. Yes, it's better to hope, but we get to the better of the hope a little bit after sitting a little bit with people.
Yeah.
But, it's interesting. This is just last week. I was in an airport in Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
And it was early in the morning, way too early for me to get on a plane. Yeah. But I had a little time. I was sitting in the United Club lounge.
Yeah.
And I just opened my Bible because I wanted to read before I got on the plane. This is just simple. But a guy saw me reading. Yeah. He came to me. A guy named Bud, North Carolina. Within the year, had just lost his wife. She stepped out into an intersection, was hit by a car, was killed instantly.
Goodness.
It was his second marriage. His stepdaughters didn't even approve of that marriage and still are distant from him. And he came up to me and said, "Are you enjoying your reading?" I was like, yeah. And then his story just started to spill out. His anxieties came out. Literally, we talked a little bit about instability. His instabilities came out. If you've got anxiety, you probably feel instability somewhere, somehow. And I think maybe he's a follower of Jesus. I'm not particularly sure. I don't know exactly, but it was a rich conversation. And I got to, I think, sow a few seeds. I told him I would pray for him. I've prayed for him several times since then.
Wow. Yeah.
I'm one link in the chain is my point.
Good.
See, sometimes we were also trained to, and I'll put it this way crassly, we were trained to close the deal.
Close the deal. Yep.
Rather than realizing, hey, if God's a sovereign God, and I'm cognizant of who he is and what he's doing in and through me every day,
Right.
and all my little associations, hey, I'm comfortable just playing my part, one link in the chain.
Yeah.
God's going to bring other people along.
If I could pull on the age thread just a little bit more too, since crew is
Should I
such
tell you my age?
Since crew is kind of diverse as far as age range and ethnicity and everything else that goes into who serves at crew, is this a lot of what you're talking about intuitive for a younger generation versus us?
Good question. I think if there's an intuitive piece, so I say partially.
Okay.
Now, I don't want, and I hate to label generations too strongly, but I see this. I've got one child who's clearly a millennial, and I've got one child who prefers to not be identified but is Gen Z.
She never remain nameless.
Naming no names.
Yeah, I do. It's my son. He's like, I'm not a generation. Like, oh well, whatever. But I would
what your dad
say,
does for a living.
I would say there's a higher consciousness of what's going on in society and culture, probably to their exposure to social media and the internet. They're able to engage well via text and social media. I wouldn't say necessarily that's actually helped them in their engagement face to face all the time. But that conscious level of what's going on all the time, all around them, I think does give them a little bit deeper curiosity and probably a sensitivity that maybe I didn't possess at their age. Where I was probably a little bit more, well, here's, again, our training. Here's what you do. Here's what you say. Here's when you say it. And I just believed it, moved forward with it, where they're a little more sensitive to the person maybe than I was. Yeah. And maybe a little more sensitive to the conversation. But again, I wouldn't necessarily say that's equipped them to have the conversation necessarily any better. Yeah, but I think there's a heightened sensitivity.
Yeah.
Well, people have been waiting on the edge of their seats for the 5 behaviors. At least I have, but we do have to kind of land the plane as well.
Yeah.
So let's do both at the same time.
I don't want to. I just want to sit here and listen to Gary for the next 2 hours.
So the 5 behaviors, I won't give them all to you. I can summarize them. Okay. I think this may be most helpful. Yeah. Listen, all these are really intuitive if we were to stop to think about it. The problem a little bit is we live in our bubbles. And so we've unlearned how to do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, sure.
Let me summarize it with just 2 or 3 things. It really encompasses all 5. The first thing they told us is listen. Listen well. Set your agenda aside. So there's a perception that we have an agenda when we approach people. So set your agenda aside and just listen to my story. So listen before you speak. Secondly, look for common ground. It's like knowing that, hey, you're anxious, I'm anxious. You feel unstable in a way, me too. It's the me too versus yeah, but. Third, and this was huge, quit using Christianese. I don't even know what you're talking about. So our language, literally our word choice has to change. And it was so interesting. One of our researchers is a man from England, really become a good friend. I really like him. Is not a follower of Jesus. And he sat down with part of the research with a group of millennials in New York. And they were using words like sin and salvation and movement and disciples and flourishing. And he stopped and goes, I have no idea what you're talking about right now. I don't know what language are you using? They use words like lost. And he looked at him and says, I don't feel lost. Do I look lost to you? Wow. What do you mean by that?
Wow. Yeah.
And we don't even think about it. We're so engrossed in our enculturation of Christianity, we don't know how to talk to people anymore. But we've literally got to use words they would use. It's not that hard, actually. You don't need a class in that, I don't think. But if we would just stop and think and probably pick our 10 words that we typically use most in a Christian setting and get rid of them, we'd be fine.
Yeah, that's really good.
But if you were to take those 3 things of listen first, look for common ground and relate to me at that level, and change your vocabulary, we'd be in pretty good shape.
Yeah, that's great. That's awesome. I can feel that all three of us have more questions, but
I'll tell you one more thing on
yes.
behaviors. This is cool. Yeah, bonus one.
Here's the bow.
Here it
Yeah,
is.
this is helpful. Well, I think it's a huge advantage for us. We live in a narrative moment. What I mean by that is a story is really important. Probably more, at least it seems to me, than in my lifetime. One of the last things they told us is, tell me a better story than the one I've heard.
Wow.
Now, the heard really goes back to their perception. Here's the story I think I know.
Right.
And it's mainly through social media and Hollywood or my own experience.
Yeah.
It's largely a negative story, as I understand it, at least for 5 of the 7.
Yeah.
So tell me a better story. And this is where I think if we actually don't launch necessarily with theological propositions, God loves you, you're sinful, God died for you, Jesus died for you, just receive him. Those are all true. And at some point, the essence of the gospel needs to be heard and responded to. But what about the whole storyline of Scripture? What about the idea of what the whole Bible says, or even picking out narratives? I've actually found that sometimes one way forward in getting down to Christian truths is look at a story in the Bible before you look at the propositions of the Bible. Because the stories are raw. The stories are real. The stories all point somewhere.
Yeah.
It is a narrative that's going somewhere. So I think we have a storyline moment where the respondents also said, tell me a better story than the one I think I know.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But
really
that's
good.
actually an opportunity.
I would encourage, as you're listening to this, you might have to listen to this a second time through. That's okay. But we would encourage you to chase this down. I guess what I mean is pursue this conversation with fellow Christ followers in your small groups. Send us an email. And really and truly, not just a cheap plug, but join one of our Sharing Your Faith classes. We really do feel like it's beneficial to do this. This is what we're called to do. This is our purpose and why we exist, to advance the kingdom of God and share the good news of Jesus Christ. So thanks, Gary. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.